Welcome to a very special episode of the Comic Book Wars podcast. I'm Nico, your weekend update correspondent with comicbookspeculation.com, and I'm here with a very special guest, the one and only, aka Mr. BOLO, Jack DeMeo. Will you please introduce yourself to our live studio audience?
What's going on, everybody? As Nico said, I'm Jack DeMeo, aka Mr. BOLO, and I'm very excited to be here. So excited to be here. I'll tell you, Nico, I paused WrestleMania for this. And if you know me and you know how I feel about wrestling, that tells you how happy to be here I am.
Yeah, that's super sad. I really appreciate you being here and was not smart enough to watch WrestleMania, but have enough friends who are still in tune with wrestling that they were messaging me talking about just how strange it was to watch wrestling without a studio audience. Can you kind of describe that for the viewers?
Yeah, it's weird because usually the performers feed off of that feedback that they get. So when a good guy does something or a bad guy does something, there's supposed to be that immediate reaction that tells you that. Without that, you just have two guys in a ring. So they're hitting each other harder because they're really trying to sell that this is hurting. And then they're having to vocalize with each other. So there's like all of a sudden there becomes this consistent shit talking in the middle of these matches, which is not usually part of wrestling. It's kind of cool, but it's so different. And it's WrestleMania is big. That's the saddest thing about it is, WrestleMania is this big pageantry, this giant show. It's as much about the entrances and the costumes and everything else that goes into it. And you just can't do that when you're following all these, COVID-19 policies inside of an empty arena.
Yeah, so you said the dirty word, which is on everyone's mind. We are in the midst of an epidemic, a pandemic, the likes of which no one has ever seen, and it has affected the community that we love in a way that is particularly harsh.
Yeah.
We're seeing major news publications discuss that right alongside articles about the death and dismay, suffering, in all walks of life. But comic books, for whatever reason, has been hit particularly hard. They are certainly a non-essential business as defined by our government, and that's resulted in stores being shut down. Can you kind of talk a little bit about what you're seeing?
Yeah, well, anytime that tragedies like this or of any sort like this have happened, the most affected immediately tend to be small business because, large corporations, they have the wherewithal to be able to withstand, shortages in business. They plan and project for those things. And the average small business does not. And then when you start looking at the fact that our entire industry is made up of small businesses, we know how much the LCS is the lifeblood of the comics industry. It is essentially the place where 90% of us get the comics that we purchase. And by being shut down, essentially what felt like overnight, like we did have some warning, but we didn't know to the degree that this was all going to turn out to end up being. And then the snowball effect of events from, as stores were seemingly starting to kind of like operate in a post quarantined environment and setting up curbside services and online pull boxes, that's when all of a sudden the rug was pulled out from under these stores with the Diamond announcement that they were no longer going to ship new products, and even the publishers were taken aback by that. So now the entire comic book industry has turned into a back issue oriented market done completely online. And even that, I'm starting to look at and go with some of the concerns people are having over even the transmission of the virus, possibly through the mail and some of the mutations. Even if it's just people's fears, I wonder if that market isn't going to get impacted at some point as well.
Thank you. want to talk about some of the measures you guys have taken at Simpleman's Comics. You're both famous and notorious for the Last Call show. We can talk about that because I think that we see that precisely the same way. But your claim to fame was Mr. BOLO.
Yeah.
The Be on the Lookout articles and press releases that you would do for CBSI were beloved by collectors, all across the country. And you continued with those efforts specifically at Simpleman's Comics. And now you guys are doing something a little different. Will you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, we were kind of forced into dropping it. I certainly don't ever want to complain about like the situation as YouTube or creators or any sort of influencers or anything like that. There's people far more affected by us, but than us. But we certainly had to rethink everything. I sent Brian a message as soon as I saw the Diamond notice and said, well, we got to come up with new content. And that's really immediately the way we viewed it, was we have to pivot in some way. And the BOLO list, it's sad that it got interrupted, because I took pride in the fact that we never missed a week, no matter what happened in my personal life or anything, that we never missed a week with the BOLO list. We always released a list every Wednesday. And even through the transition, as you mentioned, it started as a CBSI piece of content originally for Instagram, that then spawned into an article and everything else. And it was really, as I was working on the social media side for CBSI, I was looking for some sort of regularly scheduled content that I felt like that's what we needed to gain traction on the Instagram account. We needed something that people could expect every week, that's what that Instagram account was going to deliver. And it was something that we were giving to the audience, so that later when we asked for, say, you to subscribe to something or sign up to something or purchase something, you saw the value that we were giving you. And then I became fearful as I started to notice people sort of kind of copying the design, which was in the beginning very crude, because it was literally just a note sheet. It's literally this note sheet that I would write handwritten and take into an LCS with me on Wednesday. It's what I would do weekly. But I started to notice that it was getting copied. So that's when I said, well, the best way I can protect myself is to call myself Mr. BOLO, which I know rubbed some people the wrong way. Some people looked at it as arrogant. Some people looked at it like, man, this guy like sipping his own,
It was smart.
But well, I appreciate that. But for me, it was a way to protect myself and to make sure that people knew that no matter what happened, I was the one who developed that. And BOLO is not a term that I came up with. First off, it's like police jargon, be on the lookout, but it's commonly used in the clothing industry, which is where I come from. And it's a term that would be used to like alert or notify another clothing reseller that a trend is successful. So I just took something that worked in the clothing space and said, well, I bet that would work in comics. And literally the second I started doing it, I noticed that it was becoming successful. I knew it was working when I started to see like other people who I didn't know who they were saying, be on the lookout, or BOLO, or putting that in their Instagram posts. I started to notice, I said, well, this is literally a term that is now being accepted. So if everyone's going to start using it, I want to make sure that I am branded with that name. So I came with the name, but we had to pivot because there's no new comics. The BOLO list is based on new comics. So we started a back issue buy list, the BOLO buy list. It's the similar graphic. It looks a little different, but it's a similar style. I have, just like most collectors and resellers and speculators, a giant buy list of books that I tend to pay attention to, that I'm paying attention to right now. It's ever changing.
Yeah, now, Jack, can I interrupt you? Because I think this is an important question. Are these the books that have you given up? Because I've given up on books to talk about, like on my weekend update. It's no longer like, oh, look, I got this book. Now let me tell everybody else about it. I just tell people about the damn books. I've kind of given up. Have you given up, or have you succeeded in getting these books beforehand?
No, I gave up on that about a year ago.
Yeah,
It's funny.
which is what I think unfortunately most people don't get, that if you're gonna, you can either do this
Yes.
and give up on buying the books and just talk about them timely, or you can buy them. Like, you can't do both.
When I first joined Brian on the channel, that was my entire I was still like reseller first, content creator second, and I started to realize that there was really just no way to do it. And
Yeah, you got no shot.
Yeah, and integrity is important too, right? Because as soon as someone questions my list, the first thing they're always saying is like, you're trying to sell books or your own books or whatever. So at some point I had to just abandon that whole thing and say, well, you know, if I find something about a book, or I have a feeling about a book, I'm just going to talk about it and react to it as timely as I can. And it's kind of the thing where it's like karma or whatever you want to call it, where if you just give of yourself, you hope that those things kind of come back in return.
Yeah, I mean, there's a lot of put your money where your mouth is too.
It's a lot, a lot of that.
You know what I mean? Like, at the end of the day, I buy the books I talk about. I talk about the books that I buy because I believe in what I say, and I try to do what I believe. And I think most people that are in this hobby that create content, either writing weekly articles or doing YouTube stuff, are doing a lot of the same. But I'm interested. I watched the first segment. I'll be real interested to see how it goes, and I hope you guys can keep it up. You're doing a lot of content. This week, you guys secured 10,000 subscribers, and I promptly, desperately begged Brian to get the both of you on here so I could congratulate you. That's just an enormous achievement. Congratulations, my friend.
Thank you. I mean, it was our goal for maybe like the end of the year, but it's funny how things work in YouTube, where it's like a snowball. We were stagnant on growth for a while, and we felt like, okay, well, we need to change up a bunch of things, and we made some changes, and then momentum started, and I'm surprised by it. So now we've got to readjust our yearly goals and keep pushing.
Yeah, it's wild. I know that the internet companies are paying attention to comics and comic related content, because they reached out to me. Facebook reached out to me about like buying advertising. Had some guy call me. I was like, what?
Yeah, and
nobody watches my show. Like, what the hell's going on? It doesn't even make sense.
And Brian can speak to it better than I can, but he started. We've been playing with Facebook advertisements for a while, and without any success. So it was something that even though like everybody we would talk to would be like, yo, you gotta use Facebook ads. You got to use Facebook ads. And it was never something we were successful with. But the more ads you do, the more your pixel develops and it starts to understand the audience.
I don't know what the word pixel means, just for the record. That's how little I understand about any of that stuff.
Yeah, it's basically, it's like your own personal algorithm the more it develops, and I think it was part of it, really. I think the Facebook ads, because all of a sudden, as we started to get a better idea of how to work that side of it, then things started to like take off at a faster pace.
That's really neat.
And that's one of the things like Brian talks about all the time is sometimes there's like competition or whatever amongst YouTubers, and people don't understand that like the recording of the shows, the editing of the shows, that's one part of it. Brian and I spend like obscene amount of time on like the promotion side of it and the marketing side of it, which I think there's a lot of YouTubers making great content, but that's the side that they need to get it out in front of the most amount of people that you physically can.
Yeah, we don't know. Here's how bad I am, just to give you some indication. So I told Jimmy we were going to do this, and he usually sets it all up, and then he apparently I wasn't clear. He forgot, so I had to like set it up myself. So I didn't know how to make the picture. So I just downloaded a picture of, I'll show you the picture I downloaded. I downloaded this picture, and then I cropped out the four corners of the picture. And that's the icon. So you're Simple Man's Comics, and I'm Friends. You guys were kind enough to invite me onto that show. I really had a good time. Can you talk about that program? I think it's a real interesting thing. We've got a buddy who wanted to do a show similar to that, although he won't put his face on YouTube. Selling stuff is his day job, and I think he's a little apprehensive about that. But I like the format that you do, the round the horn format. And it's got a real comic shop feel to it. Can you talk a little bit about Simple Man's Comics and Friends?
Yeah, we wanted to do a podcast for a long time. We've been one of the areas that we've really seen an increased number of followers and subscribers to is our audio podcasts on Stitcher, on SoundCloud, on iTunes. And it's funny because everyone's so YouTube focused. A lot of people don't realize, like, the easiest way to consume a lot of this information is through audio. So we wanted to do something that was really geared towards an audio podcast. At the same point, we wanted to record it and have it for YouTube and be able to kind of get that double down. And it was really just took us a while to kind of kick around the concept we wanted. We knew we wanted to involve the community. All of our shows tend to be Brian and my opinion. And then it mostly ends up being a lot of my opinion, because our setup is like Brian's the play-by-play man, I'm the color commentator. So a lot of times Brian sets up a book, I end up talking about a book. So we wanted a show where it was less our opinion and more group discussion. And we wanted to be able to bring people from the outside. And it was also, we wanted to demonstrate the fact that, like, we wanted to work. We always are open to work with other YouTubers, other channels. We don't see competition or anything. I think everybody grows when you can build with each other. And there's a lot of, like, interesting opinions. So we wanted to bring on people that would have different opinions and things like that, that maybe would be different from me. You said some things on the show that I would have never thought about, especially when we talked about, like, the COVID situation. I wasn't even thinking about the movies and how that was going to impact at this time. So that was kind of like the beauty of it. And I think it's worked out really well.
One of the things I guess, there's so much going on in our market. The comic space is so multifaceted. It's absolutely impossible for one person to have any concept of what's actually going on in this giant market. I mean, from Golden Age romance books to like Bronze Age DC horror comics, like, no one could consume all of that, know the TV stuff, the indie books, the underground press. I mean, like, is that Crumb cover a 6th print or a 2nd print? Like, no one could do it. No one. And I really credit you guys for getting a ton of different voices on that show. I think it's something that I'm trying to do here as well, and something that I hope that more people will do more of, because there's so many fascinating personalities in the comic space. I mean, some of the best people I've ever met in my entire life, and it seems like oftentimes the most dysfunctional personalities, because they yell the loudest, get heard the most. And I'm just like, you're just some whack job from Ohio living in your parents' basement. Like, shut the fuck up.
It's very true. And there's a lot of talented people who, when we were talking about, like, the marketing side of it, there's a lot of talented people who, because they're not loud and they're not controversial, they get overlooked, and they have a lot to offer.
Yeah, for real. I'm really interested in seeing how that show develops. It's been super cool. Now, the other show that I really enjoy that you guys do is 3 Up, 3 Down, because I'm a trends guy, even though I got thrown out of their MeWe group and Facebook group. That's a joke for like 8 people who actually know what that joke meant.
Right. But it made me laugh.
And they're all my fans because they all watch the fucking podcast, which is what I love the most. But anyway, but they hate me. But I love trends in the comic market, right? It's how I buy, it's how I sell. And what you guys are doing there, can you kind of explain that for people that aren't familiar with the show? It's 3 Up, 3 Down. Talk to me.
Yeah, it's 3 up, 3 down. It's 3 trends that are trending upward, 3 trends that are trending downward. It's
Not
spun out.
necessarily a book, right?
Right. It's spun out
Could
of
be.
out of the hot and cold show, and it's following the same rules, because in the hot and cold show, we didn't want you to like be specific about one issue. We wanted a generalization, because there's a lot of hot lists. There's a lot of like the top this and the top that, and everybody saying what's that. But a lot of times, once a book is on the top list, it's no action for you. It's you're making a mistake if you're buying a book that's on the top 10 or the hot 10. You want to buy a book that's trending upward. So we wanted to a show that would show you those books trending towards hot and those books trending downward.
Well, one of the things I see you guys do too, which I really like, is you tell people like, oh, this book's down, down, down. Now maybe the time to go big.
Yeah. We noticed it when we, again, in the early stages doing the hot and cold show, when people would submit down picks, and I'd be like, yeah, that book's down, but man, I kind of like that book still. A lot of times you get surprised because you're not thinking about a certain book. So maybe you haven't checked what the current selling prices are for that book. But there's a lot of times, because again, the game is buy low, sell high. So when a book is low, we tend to be down on it and be negative about it. But that's literally the opportunity. And you just have to think, you have to be able to project whether or not that book is going to have an upswing. But with the way media is and the way kind of like books have popped over the last year because of publishing, because of stories. So if you have anything going in those directions that make you believe that that book is going to turn around, those are the buying opportunities. And that's why actually the down portion of the list, which I think a lot of people early on viewed as, a negative, is actually maybe the area where you can make the most ROI.
Nice. Now, can you talk a little bit about your buying and selling strategy? For people who are newer collectors, how you think about, talk a little bit about how that's developed over time, how you got into comics, and what you love about being able to do this thing really well. Because you're someone like myself who, can make money and doesn't pay for comics. You sell comics to get free comics.
Yeah, so I got back into comics. I working in the sneaker industry, heavily involved in sneaker resales, and was just burnt out with it. And I had managed baseball card stores. I've been in collectibles my whole life in some form or fashion. And I got back into comic books after finding a top 10 want list that I had made when I was like 10 years old in a shoebox at my mother's house. And I went and looked at these comics and what they were listed as valued at. And I looked up what they would be worth today. And I was like, man, I was pretty good at 10 years old. And so I started looking at comics, and it kind of got me snowballed into it. And I ended up finding we had talked about the CGC boards. So I went to the CGC boards, which is what I knew. It wasn't really the way it used to be. I ended up finding CBSI Google Plus. So I got involved there, but I ended up finding out early on in my reselling that like chasing what everybody else was doing wasn't working for me, because there was always going to be somebody doing it faster or better. And I needed to kind of get my own strategy. So I ended up really developing things that worked for me. And I've been criticized for my opinions on reselling, but I think that you have to find what works for you, and everybody has to kind of do something different. So I focused on long-term plays. I focused less on the immediate buy on Wednesday, sell on Saturday book. I felt like I was getting too burnt and chasing and always having to move at a speed that I didn't like. And if you look long-term, your ROI was much better. I also started looking at avenues that maybe didn't sell as frequently, but when they did sell, the ROI was better, because I keep mentioning ROI because a lot of people who sell comic books on eBay, they don't think about those fees and the shipping and your time spent. It's very important. So I started focusing on things like IDW incentives, boom incentives, books that were in niche categories like Ninja Turtles and G.I. Joe and Transformers, where these were things I grew up with.
I'm glad we talked about this, right? Because I was going to run through them all. You love that stuff.
I love that. Yeah, love that stuff. So that's the thing, is because I love that stuff. I grew up as a kid, like that was my entire childhood. And I feel reverence when I see it. I've always known that community exists out there, but there's just not the supply. I go to a convention, I look for G.I. Joe books. Like if I'm looking for IDW variants, you could go at a big convention, the entire show floor, and not find a single one. There very well could be nobody who thought to bring those out and display them. So when I started to notice that as a collector, my reseller side took over and said, well, then I need to be the only guy who has those. And yeah, being the only guy, and I set up at conventions and I put out entire boxes of G.I. Joe, entire boxes of Ninja Turtles. And I'll be the only one in a convention with that. And yes, those may be slow selling boxes, but when somebody comes up there and that's what they've been looking for, and I sell them 6-8 books, and I know the margin I'm making on those books, I can't tell you how much that pays for itself. And then some. It's just, you have to have the patience with that. And that's not for everybody.
Yeah, no, I get it. I've got a ton of G.I. Joe books, or I'm sorry, G.I. Joe books and Ninja Turtle books both. I was thinking about dumping my Ninja Turtle books. Is that terrible? Shame on me. In a live auction, like all the old Mirage stuff, all the kind of like new key stuff. Because I too set up at conventions from time to time, and they'll sit and sit, and admittedly, just exactly like you said, maybe once every 2 or 3 shows, somebody will show up and their face will light up and they'll grab a half a dozen books, and I'm just like, I don't really want to take those home. But again, the margins are enormous, and I kind of targeted those books because I was able to pick them up at huge sales for a quarter, or I'm sorry, like 25% of their listed price, because I bought all of them that a guy had. Because he was much like myself, ready to give up. And it's a hell of a long-term play if you're willing to kind of piece it out over time. Right. My problem is sometimes my intuition is to throw discipline to the wind and move on. Well, I love chasing hot books, right? Like I try my best not to do it. I beg people not to do it, but I give the advice I need to hear. There's like this week's hot trash, and I'm like, well, that looks fun. I could flush whatever down the toilet to go get a copy.
That's been the best thing about YouTube for me, is the schedule that we keep at Simpleman's Comics on top of my regular life is so rigorous that it has cut down my ability to do a lot of that like panic hunting. So if I'm not prepared, if I didn't pre-order on Wednesday, there is no like, okay, well, I'm driving to Charlotte and I'm just going to So that's been the beauty of that, because I'd be right there with you. I'd be caught up in the Punchline madness and everything else.
Oh shit, dude. Wow. It's going to be interesting how that one plays out. After all of this.
Majorly impacted, because if you think about the fact that Batman 92 with that 1 in 25 incentive was supposed to come out the very new comic book day that
but like this could, I can't decide whether or not this kills or saves Punchline forever.
I agree, because
people are going to be so excited when they get back to stores, and be like, fuck yeah, give me the 1 in 25. Or the economy is going to be so bad when comic shops finally open again, it's going to be like, okay, everything's half off. We're trying not to liquidate our assets. Let's talk a little bit about that issue, the Punchline first, and then the longer, bigger issue. And if for me they're intertwined, who would have guessed? Feel free to address them both.
Well, I think that for the Punchline thing, I try. It's funny because I try not to judge. Brian gets very very worked up about this subject, because everyone's talking about Punchline, right? And it's true. You go down your Instagram feed, it's all you see. Facebook groups, it's all you see. It's all you see anywhere. And Brian gets this like reputation. I tease him, call him the old man of comics, because it all bothers him. I sit back and I think it's a pretty historic moment if you look at like how popular, how fast, I mean, I've been doing this now for almost a decade, and hardcore speculation on a Wednesday basis. And I don't know that I've ever seen this much, but I think it's indicative of social media. It's indicative of the FOMO culture. Also, I have to give this character some credit. Like, the basis of this character seems to be one that I would say, as a long-term speculator, oh, I have interest in this character. This character has legs. It's just, I don't like how fast this character has risen in price. This is a tough buy-in right now at current market prices. You're talking, steep prices on a modern. So the longevity of it, I don't know. And I'm right there with you where it's like, when this thing comes back, it could be the hottest thing going, or it could be a dead issue, because certainly there's much less talk about Punchline today than there was a few weeks ago. So how that kind of like momentum is going to be maintained, we're going to have to see.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like, the problem is the book is it's stayed hot. It hasn't fizzled. People haven't. And by hot, I don't mean that it's like hot percent. It's just stayed, right? And people haven't been able to move on to the next Punchline or whatever book it was, because there's no new books. It's a head scratcher for me. I always say that the strangest thing that's non-intuitive about comics is that once a book sells for a particular price, it's stuck there until it starts selling for a different price, right? Now with big keys, it's usually like, 2,000 book turns into a $1,500 book and it's stuck at 1,500. But when it comes to like, newer hot book of the week kind of things, a $5 book becomes a $20 book and it's stuck there. People pay $20 for it until they pay $40 for it, and then it's stuck there. Nobody wants to sell for less than that because it's cheap enough that they can afford not to sell it. So it's all very fascinating for me. But let's talk about the much bigger issue, which is what the heck is going to happen to this market more generally. I talked a little bit about this in the weekend update. There are those in our community who suggest, nothing's wrong, it's okay. My comic shop took all their listings offline, so now that they've done that, there's a ton of new space on eBay for sellers and local comic shops to move their books on there. Same with Newcadia and some of the other big boys. We're going to bounce right back, and there's not going to be any dip in the market. Others are doomsaying that, here comes the great comic depression. It's going to be the 90s all over again, blood in the streets. Retailers are going to be closing down, liquidating their assets and trustee sales by bankruptcy trustees. Liquidate your liquidate your comics so you can have cash for the coming implosion. You might be able to buy out a shop. And I'm just like, what is happening? Not a lot of talk about a middle ground there.
Right.
What are you sort of thinking? I know it's a real fluid situation, as we discussed. I mean, every day it seems like there's just more and more information. Thoughts?
Yeah. Excuse me. Well, I think 9 out of 10 times, and I think in this situation, more than likely, and you're right, there's no talk about a middle ground. I think that's where it's going to land, though. It's going to land somewhere in that middle, because first off, it's not everything's rosy and great, because as we talked about in the beginning, there's just so many shops that just cannot operate without the cash flow, and without those shops, that's less stores to put orders in for books, and that ultimately affects every bit of the bottom line of the publishers, which makes them change the way they do business. It has a trickle down effect that's immense. And then the situation with Diamond can't be understated, because I refuse to believe that Diamond doesn't have some long-standing financial issues. For them to make some of the decisions they made, and then they didn't make them. It's not like they came out and said, for health reasons, we're doing this. Their original reasons had to do with stores and not trying to put a financial burden on them. But then they shut down payments to publishers. And there's some product that was shipped to them in the middle that was in the limbo. Some of the product from the last couple of weeks where, like, I talked to the creators of Kanto, where like they don't know if they're going to get paid or when they're going to get paid for their trade paperback that just hit, because they hadn't gotten paid yet from the royalties from the sales through Diamond. So the impact is going to be immersed throughout the market, but I don't think it's going to be. I don't ever believe the doomsday people. People have revered comic book collecting for too long. It's too important to too many of us to just die. And I do think we're seeing a softening of sales prices. So I do think there's some buying opportunity in a down market, but I don't think it's going to be this like all out free for all that, I've also heard people talk about. You may be able to buy a shop because there are going to be shops going out of business, but I don't think I don't think the pennies on the dollar, burn it all down scenarios are going to happen.
Yeah. Let's talk about buying opportunities. You're one of a handful of people that watches the market, I think, as closely as I do. It's one of the things I like about watching your shows. You're always kind of hip to price tags. What are you seeing out there? I can kind of give you my take first, but or you want to go first? You tell me.
Whatever you like. What would you like? You want me to go?
Yeah, you talk.
I'm seeing. I was expecting a larger dip, to be honest with you.
Me too.
I haven't seen the dip that I thought I saw. Now, like I said, there's a softening. So
even in live auctions.
Yes, absolutely. And so I mean, and I think the longer this goes, the more that's going to happen. So I think everyone kind of had this like end of April thing that was unrealistic from the get-go. So now I think we're going to go into May. I think based on what I'm seeing trend wise, I think the prices are going to get even a little lower into May, but we're not seeing the tanking because, as you said, it's funny. There's like a hot book freeze. So there's certain books that like the prices have just frozen at that we're not seeing and I mentioned this on our show.
The psychological phenomenon is called loss avoidance. Stockbrokers they'll learn about this in college. Basically, or like economic people, it's like an economic psychology principle. It's like once you pay a certain amount for something, even though it makes all the logical, reasonable, rational sense in the world to sell, and cut your losses and move on, people just hold the fuck on and they'll ride that train all the way to the pit of hell. I mean, down it goes.
Right. So the $25 books have maintained their price well. Like books in that price range haven't really dipped at all. And then I've seen an influx of books like New Mutants 98 being listed because people want to try to people that need money. That's a $300 book. But because of what you're saying, they're listing it at a price that they
ASM 129.
Yeah. Yep. That's another one.
There were like 9 auctions for it at one point in time. I was like, what is happening right now?
Right. And that's the other thing is I think anyone listing anything by auction right now is taking a risk because I can't predict what on a given week to week is going to happen.
Did you watch Comic Book Wars? Did you watch me talk about my live auction experience?
No.
So I threw a book up that was worth a truckload of money, right? And it set like a record price. Without getting into the details, let's just say it was magnificent for your buddy George. Okay. Buyer's like, I need till Wednesday to pay. I'm like, no big deal. Wednesday comes or Tuesday comes. He's like, sorry, I can't. Talked with the family, and I'm thinking to myself, like, what the fuck? What are you doing bidding on my book? And you got to talk to your family about it. Like, what is happening?
Right.
So anyway, I'm like, no big deal. I know how to make second chance, offers. Yeah. Right. So I go to the next guy. He offered me like 25% less than. I'm like, no. So I go to the third guy. Now he agrees it's like a 10% hit, but I'm like, whatever, let's just get it out the door. He promptly pays and then it's like, I'm going to need you to send it to a different location. I'm quarantined. I'm like, here's your fucking money back and it's over. I kind of shamed him a little bit on the show first because he told me he was going to watch and I told him I'd think about it, and then had every single person that watches the show explain how ridiculous that is. But that was about the end of it. And, I see like a lot of funny business. Do you follow like Lyria Exchange?
Yes.
Okay. There's a flash from the past.
Yes.
But they do, they used to do a really good job. Now I don't know what the hell they do. They don't do much, but there's this like anachronistic website that has got like an algorithm that puts like top watched book and a couple other things on there. The guy that runs it's a super nice guy, but I don't think, they should hook up with Brian. He could give him some of his newfangled military like computer skills. But their spider, I don't think has been rewritten in like 25 years. But the point is, the top book on there, it's not a real thing. It's like it's just like some invented auction for some not expensive $3 book that's been slabbed as a 9.8 that they've got at like $800. It's a Messiah Complex variant that's like a $3 book.
Mm-hmm.
The sellers got 0 feedback, or maybe like 2 feedback. The bidders, there's like 77 bids. They've all got no feedback, and I'm just like, what is this? What is happening right now? So I know the cons are out in full force, right? Like every scam artist in the world's like on eBay ready to steal.
Well, and it's going to happen more and more as people just in general are home. So you got to think like.
And tough times, they bring out the best and worst in people.
Right. And eBay's been difficult anyway. Like I've watched this as an eBay seller for the last 15 years. Plus I've watched it become increasingly easier for somebody to get over on you. The amount of times that somebody claims that there's something wrong with a book, and then I get a picture of the book, and I'm like, that's not the book I shipped.
The funny thing is, like, for the YouTube talking heads, they get this shit ass backwards. The modern market is the hardest one to manipulate because there's so many fucking copies.
Exactly.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Like you want to manipulate a market, you manipulate the golden age market. There's like 17 books.
The golden age market turns with one sale. One sale.
Right. Book. You need more money to do it, but like, you grab like Mask 1 and 2. Are you kidding me? Those sales. I love that book, but come the fuck on.
It's like a guy you've had on the channel, Dinesh Shamdasani. That's a guy who's a serious comic book collector.
He creeps me out with like his ability to like he could move an entire market. I watched Bloodshot. It was excellent. It was fucking excellent today. I was so excited.
That's awesome that you think that, because like that movie to me did exactly what they set out to do with it. It was just an action movie.
Yeah, it was great
at its core.
Yeah, it was great. I was thrilled. It breaks my heart that it didn't appeal to like people in theaters, and that the audience is going to get stuck watching it at home. I hope people watch it. I think they'll enjoy it as much as I do. It's like a weird time in the world. I hope they love it. He's just such an ace, dude. Dinesh is such an ace. Just
and I hope they get a sequel, because the good thing about that movie is it only costs like $44 million to make. So it was inexpensive. Hopefully the studio chalks it up to the situation and gives them another shot.
Yeah. See, one of the things I like about you and Brian is at your core, you guys are like diehard fans, right? Like,
I want everything to be successful.
Yeah, right. You love the books. You love the comics. You're not really hating on anything. It's just kind of like, how can we help other people succeed? What's some of the other stuff you're really looking forward to?
It's really tough in this kind of environment. I think the Eternals movie is the one that I think I'm most interested to see.
Talk about cheap books,
right? And that's what I just talked about, because
they were on your list.
Everybody that's being negative about the Eternals movie is the same exact thing we heard right before Guardians of the Galaxy came out. So it's like, to me, this is just if Marvel can do this a second time, if they can take a comic book that nobody knew anything about, that nobody paid attention to, and make it this huge film franchise, then at that point we as as investors need to start looking at what books we're looking at completely differently. To me, this is like the litmus test if Marvel literally has that type of magic. And I think they do. I have full faith in it. And the books are just incredibly cheap right now because people are so impatient.
Oh my gosh. Holy cow. I got to get a price variant.
Yeah.
I've sold so many of them, buy them, sell them, buy them, sell them. I'm just like waiting for a real high grade copy to come in. I'm like, ooh.
And it's a
live auction. Can't wait.
It's incredible. I'm watching more and more copies of Eternals books get listed. So I wonder, like, what is someone's motivation when they're listing Eternals books right now in such a down market? Like, do you not believe in it? What is because the prices are like a fifth of what they were just a few months back. So even if it doesn't get to some big level when the movie comes out, I mean, all you have to do is get the value back to where it was around D23 time, and you've made a great ROI.
Yeah, absolutely. It's going to be real interesting. I'm super excited about that one. What about the rest of phase 4? You want to talk about phase 5? I mean, things have really been delayed. It's like,
everything getting
it's like we got we just got like the puck kicked like 12 months back.
Right. And I think
that we can try all over again.
I don't think we've in one sense, it sucks for the comic book like speculation game because it just delays everything. But it's really actually, if you take a second and think about what you just said, like
there's an opportunity.
Yeah, you get a second chance. And that's what I said with Eternals. It's like, if you missed it, you have a completely another chance to do this all over again. And all of these Disney Plus properties and all of these properties that we know are going to be successful now, you look at like Moon Knight #1 from 1980 with the Bushman first appearance, that book has crept down like more than 50% from where it was trading. So you can get in on Moon Knight stuff now. You can get in on Blade stuff now. You can get in on Miss Marvel stuff. You can get in on She-Hulk stuff. She-Hulk 1 has been an absolute roller coaster of a book over the last several months because number one, there's a plethora of copies available. And then number two, it's just like anything else. No one's talking about it right now. So because it's not being talked about, there's that dip. It's just so many opportunities, not just now, but over the next coming months, as you just naturally look at it, like they can't film everything at once. So they're going to have to restart this thing in like a slow progression. They're still going to have to give just due to Black Widow. They're still going to have to give just due to all that stuff that they've got, Eternals and everything else. So everything is going to get pushed back to a large degree. And then on the other side, Batman. I'm real optimistic that come
on. When was the last time Batman was the last time we had Batman movies? Batman was the hottest comic in comics. Period. That's it. #1 with the bullet. Batman.
Yep. So I'm real hopeful doing if it's really like as close to an adaptation of Long Halloween as we can get. For those who have read that story, it'll kill on the big screen. It's one of those comics where you read it and you're like, man, I would love to see a movie of this.
It's funny. I got a buddy who had never read a comic before in his entire life. That's the trade paperback I bought and gave to him.
Really? That's a good, such a great one.
I was like, it was when I was just getting back into comics, right? And so like, when you're just getting back in, I was with other people. It wasn't like I was going directly to the comic shop. I didn't feel real comfortable. Like I didn't know anybody there, or you know what I mean? You're just dragging people along. And I'm like, hey, can we stop in here real quick? And I asked the people there, I was like, my buddy's never read a comic book ever. What the hell should we buy him? And everybody's got like crazy opinions. That's what I picked. I picked The Long Halloween and bought it for him. My next door neighbor, Greg, who will never watch this podcast, but I bought him The Long Halloween. He never read it. It's still sitting on his shelf. And the funny part is going to be when this movie comes out, I'm waiting for him to be like, dude, that movie was great. I'm going to be like, yeah, idiot, you have the fucking comic book in your room. I tried to help you be part of this thing of ours. And he wouldn't make the courageous move to crack open the funny book, as my grandmother used to call them, and give it a try. Why don't you try now that you've seen the movie? Tell me if you like the book better.
I just think the minor introduction of villains throughout that story is
Super
going to
cool.
lay the groundwork for so many other DC films. It's
Oh,
kind of like perfect film to start with the new Batman franchise. So I just think it can work so much. And then you mentioned Dinesh. I would say Bad Idea Publishing is like the other thing that I'm like really curious to see what happens with it.
yeah.
I will say
Fascinating.
one thing though, one development that really I'm curious about. And Brian couldn't be here today. He was supposed to be here, and if he was here, he would bring this up because he's hot about this. But the books getting added to TFAW's website, that was a little disappointing because I thought one of the original things was not being able to buy these books online was supposed to be part of the allure, was that you had to go to
Now,
a shop and
when are
physically
they getting published?
I thought May was originally supposed to be, but they put out a
Right.
press release and saying they're putting the launch on hold. So
Well,
now I don't know if we have a date.
Can you still buy them on TFA?
Yeah, you can reserve that ENIAC, the first one, one
But
per
I didn't know if
copy.
you could still do that now in light of the pause.
That I'm not sure. I haven't checked and say since
Because that would be interesting.
But
yeah, I got to get Dinesh back on the podcast.
I'm real interested to see how that's going to work because I think, as far as their business plan for them, I'm not putting my hands in their pockets. Those are all guys who have other careers going, so they can build that business as small and slowly as they want to. But I think from a secondary market perspective, I called it like the Supreme model of like, we're not going to put a ton of product out there, but we're going to build up our brand recognition to the point that you want to
explain that for people who are 55 and watching this podcast because Steve Borak was on here and they're friends with him. What is the Supreme model?
So in the clothing industry, there's a brand called Supreme, and if you look at their clothing product sells for ridiculous prices.
So be precise about that.
They retail a T-shirt with literally just the name on it. They'll retail it for $150, but the resale value of that same T-shirt on eBay that same day will be $800. And they do that intentionally. They have created and cultivated this market by limiting the amount of clothing that they release, only dropping on certain days. Even though their clothing brand is so popular, they could do a deal tomorrow with any company and be in every, say, name your department
Macy's,
store.
Walmart,
Macy's.
Gap, whatever.
They could do
Abercrombie and Fitch. Yeah, they'll all take them.
They could do hundreds of millions of dollars in contracts tomorrow because they are by far the most popular streetwear brand of young people. But because they have controlled and disciplined themselves with how they release things, a company that was very small is now this like giant, and they can sell a crowbar, literally a crowbar with the company's name on it, and sell it for $400, and kids will line up to buy this crowbar. It's insane. Keychains sell for a couple $100. And so I look at what Dinesh is doing and I see it as the Supreme model where it's like, he's just going to put out the best quality comic books he can. He's going to limit how you get them. He's going to turn it into an event to get them, a difficulty to get them. At the same time, it supports LCSs. It supports the grassroots people in our business. And I'm interested to see what's going to happen on the secondary market because I think there's a lot of people who aren't going to have access to Bad Idea books, and that's going to cause secondary market spikes. And that is going to
I don't have access to it. I know a couple guys that own shops that got contracts for it. But like, I feel like an asshole being like, "Hey, will you mail me this one book?"
Right.
And I'll probably regret that, but I guess I can pay $40 for one when they come out if I, just because I want to help the market for Bad Idea. I want to read it. Dinesh is a friend. I like what he's doing.
And then their ability to get those books, I think.
But if that book sells for $250 and I got to spend $250 for one, believe me, I'm going to be pissed. Know that. Not at Dinesh, just at myself.
And I think that those books are going to get picked up by Hollywood quicker than other indie companies because it's Dinesh and his partners at HiveMind partnering with bad ideas. So like they're already a Hollywood production company. They're already doing The Witcher with Netflix and Bloodshot with Sony.
Looking forward to Gideon Falls. And are you kidding me? They're gonna do it.
And, you know,
a Bill Gaines biopic.
No,
it's like makes me happier than anything in the world.
And then you look at the talent they have on the roster. And the funniest thing is it's really the original Valiant from when, well, not the second incarnation when Dinesh took over. It's Jeff Lemire, Matt Kinn, all those guys were Valiant. And I think Luis LaRosa is like the most underrated artist in all of comics.
No question about it.
He's incredible. So I think he's gonna like catch a lot of people's eye, that people who don't pay attention to Valiant, or people who are stuck with that like old Valiant bias that was kind of very strong in the speculative community. I think will be like,
that's because here's what I think happened with Valiant, right? There are people like me who, instead of buying Hulk 181, were buying Harbinger 1 when they were like 10. Paying some outrageous amount of money, 12. I don't know how old I was, but I was a kid. And they fall into one of two camps. The vast majority of them are profoundly butthurt because they don't have a Hulk 181. Instead, they've got like 3 copies of Harbinger 1 with a coupon in it. And then there's the other guy who, he's still a diehard Valiant fan, and he wants those 3 copies to go through the roof.
Right. Right. Won't give up on them. Won't give up on them.
Yeah.
Anything.
I gave up after with DMG, man. After Dinesh left, I'm done.
Yeah.
It's a wrap.
Look, I enjoyed Bloodshot movie, like we talked about. But the whole situation is a mess. Like, for those who don't know, like, that was supposed to be a deal. It was supposed to be Bloodshot. There was supposed to be a post-credit scene that set up Harbinger. And then DMG didn't have faith in the whole thing, so they sold Harbinger to Universal. So now you're going to have a segmented Valiant universe where there's going to be essentially 2 Valiant universes. Where you're going to have the stuff that Sony does, and then this Harbinger movie that's supposedly going to be coming from Universal, if it ever
sounds like Disney and Sony. Can we talk a little bit about that nightmare? So if you're like me, and I've got just random stuff around here that's like within handshot, none of it I prepared. You get really excited about things like, man, wouldn't it be nice if they actually did a Spider-Verse as opposed to just the cartoon?
I believe it has to happen. I believe.
Is it going to be any good? I mean, can Sony pull it together?
I think Sony can do it if everything is done through Marvel the way that it's been. Not kind of.
I love that you're the eternal optimist. I'm still.
Yeah, I am.
I have anxiety.
Well, what's difficult about the deal with Sony is it's very similar to like a sports contract where you're on like a 1-year deal. So it's like, every year Sony and Marvel have to kind of rework this contract. That's what's nerve-wracking about that is we don't know from time to time if they're going to fuck this up, and they've got such a good thing going right now. I feel like the cartoon was the litmus test for the fact that Into the Spider-Verse concept worked so well. And I just gotta believe would be such an amazing way to introduce the mass public to 2 characters who we know in comics are 2 of the most universally beloved characters, Miles Morales and Spider-Gwen. These characters, their potential far exceeds just about 90% of what I see in Marvel. And if they can just get them to the main film franchise, the licensing and the individual movies for both of those characters, the unique audiences that both of those characters will connect with, while still tying into a Spider-Man mythos that we're all familiar with, it can just work so perfectly.
Yeah, lights out. My buddy Tony works at a drug rehab. Used to read comic books, but he like a child destroys them. Like fucking mangled and shit. I remember I was like, "Oh, you collect comic books?" And I was just like, "What has happened here?" It looks like a murder scene. But his favorite, like, loves Marvel movies. There's like he's got like an Avengers background on his Facebook, and kind of like, he's the audience we never touch, right?
Right.
His favorite comic related property, that Into the Spider-Verse cartoon.
It's universal.
Number one with a bullet. He's just like, "Oh, I love that," and I'm just like, "Really?" And he's like, "Yeah, it's better than the Avengers, better than Endgame." And I'm just like, "What? Okay."
It's universally beloved. They could literally do that same sort of movie on the big screen, and it would be successful.
I literally cried in that movie. There's something out. There's something. Look, your old buddy George and I was just like.
And here's how much of a Sony optimist I am. I will give you an exclusive sneak peek to a future BOLO buy list book. Venom. I believe it's The Haunt. I think it's the black cover miniseries book that they did. And the reason why is I'm going to go ahead and be so optimistic that Sony is going to be successful that that book is a natural crossover, because it's Venom, it's Carnage, it's part of Maximum Carnage, which we know is what the next movie is based on, and the main character besides those two who's featured in that book is Morbius. So since that's the next Sony franchise, if that was the next Venom movie where we have Venom, Carnage, and Morbius, I would not be surprised at all.
Love it. You heard it here first. I promised I'd keep you for an hour. Before we go, I'd like to give you an opportunity to talk to our viewers, let them know where they can find you. If they're not one of the 10,000 people that subscribe to your YouTube channel, tell them where they can find you guys.
Yes, we are Simpleman's Comics on YouTube. And you can find me on Instagram at aka_Mr.Bolo. It's a little complicated. I'm on Twitter at Jack P. DeMeo. We've got 5 or 6 weekly shows at any given time, as many as 10 to 12 videos a week. We're trying to keep consistent content on the channel. We know everybody's at home right now. Everybody's kind of going stir crazy. And we're trying to keep this comic book culture alive. And I think part of the key of that is just keep talking comics, keep it part of our daily lives and routine, so that we don't feel like this whole thing has been shut down.
Well said, my friend. Thank you so much for joining us. I'll talk to you soon.
Thank you for having me, buddy.
Pleasure was mine.